welcome to the Flix Forum podcast, where each episode we go back and we look at a Netflix original film in the order of release. Today we have Netflix 107th film. It's the 2018 Italian drama On My Skin, or Sulla, pelle. It's directed by Alessio Cremonini and it stars Alessandra, Borghi and Jasmine Trinca. I am Jesse and I have MJ with me. Hello.
How are you, mate?
Good. How are you?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Yes, very good. We've got another international flavoured film for our audience today, and obviously, again, watched it in subtitles with the original dub. I'm hoping.
I did. Yeah, that is correct. Was there an option to listen to it English dubbed?
I don't know. I just thought I'd say it. Good. Well, we start our show with our fast flicks, where we do our own little summary of the film. So, what are you thinking for this one, MJ?
Alrighty, On My Skin is based on a true story, which was apparently a massive story in Italy of a guy who's arrested for a petty crime, beaten up unprovoked by the police, and he spends the following days suffering in prison due to his injuries.
Yes, obviously same based on a true story, and I've just gone with it's a man who plays smart with the police when he's arrested, and in turn they deal out their own justice.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to go too deep into it in the fast flicks.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one because this might lead into our little discussion about what we've found out about the film. But the tagline in a couple of markets was interesting, where the title On My Skin, but then a lot of places had as the extra tagline, the last 7 days of Stefano Cucci. So a bit of a spoiler alert early on in the title of the film, as well as where we're going to go with this one, I'd say.
Can I just say, when you pause the movie on Netflix, and you know how you pause it, and then if you pause it for like 10 seconds or so, eventually the logo of the screen of the film comes up, and I paused it. I don't know what I was doing. I came back and it said like, On My Skin, the last 7 days of Stefano Cucci. And I reckon I was an hour in and I'm like, okay, I didn't realize it. He's going to die.
Oh, what about the opening scene?
Well, that was not necessarily that wasn't him being completely dead. That was like, okay, maybe they're going to have to revive him. And you're right. Like, I did get that, and I'll probably get that when we start talking about the film. I did start to think like, that opening scene was actually. But then when I read it, I was like, that's a bit of a bummer. Like, but I think we'll talk about it anyway, about why and how it actually does work.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, what else have you worked out about this one too?
So it premiered at Venice Film Festival in the Horizons section in 2018. So this was the opening film for the Horizons section. That was 29th of August in 2018. Netflix bought the international rights for that, which Netflix, as we've seen, they've done that quite a bit with festivals, but there was a little bit of a backlash in Italy specifically, obviously this being a big Italian story, B, an Italian film. It was basically going to release day and date on Netflix as it was going to be in cinemas. So Lucky Red was the distribution company within Italy. I think they produced the film as well. Netflix bought the international rights, so there wasn't much they could do about it, but there was a lot of exhibitors who were pretty annoyed at this happening. So this is, mid to late 2018. Now we're kind of seeing this debate. Well, actually, it's probably a bad thing to say right now because nothing's actually really getting released to cinemas. But this conversation has really heated up in the past 6 to 12 months, and it's interesting how back in 2018, which isn't very long ago, this was hot topic that you can't release a film that's available on streaming, and we're trying to make money over at the exhibitors. And this is probably one of the first times it happened, and people were pretty irate about it. And that's the whole thing about behaviour change that we're looking at, and we're going to see a lot more once everything opens up again.
Yes, yeah, very nicely put. So a couple other things I saw were about the production of the film, I guess, and the real life sister of Stefano. After seeing the movie, she spoke to the actor who played her brother, Alessandro Borghi, and told him, I don't know how you did it, but you just like him. And he'd lost 18 kilos to play the role, which is, 39 pounds for people that need that conversion, but that's a lot of weight that he lost for
Wow.
this role. So yeah, a very interesting sort of thing to obviously see. You have, you know, living relatives that can actually see their family members played on screen in I guess what's a little bit of a traumatic experience for some of these people too. It was nominated for quite a few awards. I didn't go through and list them all down because it had 14 wins plus another 13 nominations. So it had 27 nominations altogether. A lot of them were for the directing by Alessio Cremonini, and also for that performance of Alessandra Borghi for playing the character of Stefano. So yeah, nothing like, I think there was like the Italian Golden Globe Awards and things like that. So a lot of European, and it won awards at the Venice Film Festival, like you mentioned as well. But yeah,
this would have been absolutely gut wrenching to watch as a family member, or even anyone who knew him, just reliving these moments. And it would have been, I thought it was gut wrenching to watch. So I imagine knowing this, and especially knowing that he's not around anymore. That would be an absolute killer. And just in case we weren't clear, we are going to spoil this film even more than we may already have. I suppose if you listen to this podcast, you might be familiar with the subject anyway. But we're going to go through the film and spoil it. If you do want to watch it and don't want the movie ruined, turn off now and come back later. But yeah, this would have been bloody hard to watch for them.
Yeah, I think possibly after its success, like across Italy and on Netflix, it did get a theatrical release in the States in December 2018 as well, just a small run, as well as playing at the Italian Film Festival in Portugal in April 2019. So obviously it had this build up that people still wanted to see it, and people were willing to play it at their festivals, which is a nice little thing, I guess, and probably leads into...
That's really interesting.
Yeah, about the consensus of this one. What did you see that the critics and the audiences thought of this?
Yeah, from what I can see, it was wildly popular. It got a 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb, or it's got a 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb, just under 7,000 ratings. So not huge, but 7.3 out of 10, definitely one of the highest Netflix original films that we've done in some time. And it's a 3.8 out of 5 on Letterboxd. 4,500 ratings there, but very, very similar positive sentiment. I did have a bit of a flick through some of the reviews just to get a scan of what the consensus really was. And to be perfectly honest, most of them were written in Italian. So that's obviously where their big hitting zone is, with the Italian community who, as I said, probably knew this story. And that's one thing I discovered, is this was a huge story at the time in Italy. We obviously in Australia did you know about it? I didn't know about it, Jesse.
No, new story to me.
No. So this was obviously a huge story, and can you imagine this massive story, you know, and sort of 7-8 years later, this film comes out depicting what actually happened behind the scenes that you never would have seen. I can imagine people flocking to see it, so it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the 94% of Google users liked this one. So again, on that high side that you mentioned, Rotten Tomatoes only had 6 critics check it out, and it was at 67%. So no consensus, but it's positive-ish. Audience had it at 86%, but that's on a bit over 100. So a little bit higher from the audience too than the critics.
Only 6 critics when it did, as you said, a couple of film festivals. That's so surprising.
Especially Venice, you think, yeah, that probably would have been a packed cinema.
Yeah. No one wants to put their reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and I don't blame them.
Good. All right. Well, I think that leads us into our early thoughts for this one. Where are you going to go with this?
But like I've kind of laboured the point already, but I've probably got 2 main points to take out of this. And one, I didn't know this story. As I said, I didn't even realise that this was the story about how he died until probably only had 25 minutes left in the film. So it was trending badly for him, but you know, I wasn't sure that he wasn't going to get out of it somehow. So I didn't know that part of it. And the second point is I can really appreciate the things that this movie did well. I think it did a great job of shining light on some wrongdoing. It was a nice advocate for human civil rights. It exposed these atrocities that occurred. It was generally really tidy direction, considering the subject matter that they had to work with. I thought the performances were great from Alessandra Borghi, and I thought Jasmine Trinca was also great. And it definitely stayed with me after watching. But This movie was the closest thing to a kick in the guts that I've experienced in a very, very long time. And honestly, I think it was a chore to watch.
Okay, good. Yeah, yeah. I think that I'll start. It's heavy. Like this is not.
Mm.
Um, there's not a lot of hope in this film. It's
No, there's not.
it's painful. But it was compelling for me. I thought, like you mentioned, it's beautifully shot. The performances were good, narrative wise. Like it made sense. Wasn't there was no confusion for
Mm.
me. Sometimes I get from translations and films in other languages,
Hmm.
but like yeah, I enjoyed it, but it was so heavy. This is like. You don't finish watching this feeling good about anything. It's like I finished it. I was like, okay, what can I sort of do now to pick myself up a bit because it's yeah, it wasn't a struggle, but it was yeah, hard, really hard.
Like the question is like how can you watch a man deteriorate until he has nothing left? And I know that sick feeling in your gut that you basically have throughout the whole film. I know that's what you're supposed to feel. Um, for me, without the prior knowledge of knowing this story and situation, I just found that side of it was far too consuming for me. And I completely understand that if you knew the story, if you knew the victim, not personally, but you knew of the victim, you wanted to get an insight of what happened, that would have a lot of appeal. And I believe that's where a lot of the positive sentiment comes from because it makes you feel how bad what happened was. And you get to see that, and someone's brave enough to tell that story. But watching it was just rough.
Yep, I agree. Well, let's talk about the characters. So I think start us off, MJ, with Stefano.
Yeah. Like as I mentioned, I thought the performance was excellent. And again, no prior knowledge to what Stefano Gucci was like, but I thought it was really powerful because that's a bloody tough role to play. Really difficult to try and showcase a character when you just got to keep making yourself go down, 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 down a health. He was a likable character, and it's weird to talk about a real person as a character, but we sort of have to, don't we? Like, I just want to preface that as well. He was a likable character, but he was a frustrating one as well. They set him up to be a pretty decent guy, albeit with a checkered past and showing that he's capable of some pretty wrongdoings. But they show him going to church. They show him having that dinner with his parents, holding down a job, has a kind of a fun relationship with his sister and his brother-in-law. He's got a normal relationship with his mate in the car. What bothers me is his decision making. His even he kind of tempted the cops a little bit at the start, not in a bad way, but he could have handled himself a little bit better there. His refusal to accept medical treatment, his decision to tell people what happened at weird times. I never quite understood why he was telling someone, but then why he wasn't telling somebody else. His attention to detail with his lawyer and the family lawyer. None of these happenings actually changed how I felt about Stefano because I'd already banked up so much sympathy for him. But it just caused a bit of frustration me with the film and the plot that all this stuff was happening that seemed really avoidable. It didn't change the way that he was treated because it was still completely unacceptable. But it just bothered me a little bit.
Yeah, I think you've pretty much touched on all my questions I had for the end for you because it's the same sort of situation. I might even do them now just because we're talking about him, and it's probably
Oh
fits
yeah.
him nicely. But like you mentioned at the start, he sort of gave the cops a reason to sort of come after him straight away, and they ask him for his papers, hand over anything you've got. He lies to them. They find drugs on him. He's a bit of a smart ass. Like, why didn't he just follow? Like, he could have just followed the instructions. If so, I was a little bit, yeah. I didn't. That sort of
and it wasn't terrible. He was just a little bit of a smart ass. And you know what? When you've got these egocentric, power hungry people in roles of power, then just don't give them an inch because they'll take a mile. And that's exactly what happened. And it's not to say that he got what he deserved because he absolutely didn't. But it still felt like when he was doing it because they build the tension so nicely, and when it's happening, you're like, oh, just don't. And that's good filmmaking, but it still bothered me.
Yeah, I feel like he had a couple of really good opportunities that he could have got help to, and I get that he was concerned about ramifications, I guess, but the paramedic scene in particular, like he gets the paramedics in his cell and he's like, we can chat privately, I'll take you somewhere else and you can talk to me, sort of thing. And even there's a cop that you thought was okay and he's like, just take me to court, don't take me to the hospital. Like I guess they wanted to show you that he was that adamant or concerned, but at the same time, it was like he did have a lot of opportunities that sort of frustrated me at times too. Like he could have just jumped onto one of them at one stage, and they could have termed it dramatically a little bit to have a misleading of something rather than him just rejecting it straight away. Because he's literally on his deathbed, and like what more did he have to lose by telling people what the cops had done rather than just randomly selecting people to tell?
I know. I agree with that, because I think I think one thing about the paramedic scene and that really nice cop they had at that second police station, I think that was an example. I'm guessing that's exactly how it was in real life, and I think they wanted to be like, look, not everyone was bad. In fact, these people in particular were excellent. They did everything that they could. And my second line of thinking there was, if I was him, he made the story about him falling down the stairs. Why don't you just say, I got beaten up, I got beaten to a pulp? You don't have to say that the cops beat you up, but at least they'll understand why you got those injuries. It's like, oh, what's wrong with you? Oh, like an hour before the cops got me, I got absolutely destroyed by someone. Like, that's all you got to do. And then everyone knows, okay, we're treating him for this.
Yep. Yeah. I feel like that the emphasis through his character on these the things that he did want was his lawyer and his epilepsy medications, and I felt like they were very repetitive in trying to show that those were two things that he was prevented from. So maybe trying to take a little bit of the onus off the decision making and his not wanting to change his clothes or not wanting medical assistance, because he was trying to make a stand and say, hey, I actually need these things first before I can consider doing that. And obviously he didn't know that he didn't have enough time to actually to do that. So that was a little bit sad. And I also liked the sort of connection through his family, I guess, where it was just sort of, you could see, even though we didn't get to see his family a lot, that you could tell how done with him they were. But even though they were done with him and he doesn't get to experience that, they're trying to, visit him and check in on him. And I did like that he still had this family that still cared for him, even though he honestly lied to them a lot. And, you see that final scene there at the end where, he has this reflection that he's like, they don't deserve a son like me. And he's obviously feeling let down because they didn't see him, but he has no idea. And it just sort of made me feel more for him as a character, I guess. There was a little bit too about this religious side of things, because in the one of the opening scenes, we see him praying, having a religious thing. And there's at the end, he asked for this Bible, and I thought it was like a little bit of an opening and an ending where maybe I'm not saying that this is, obviously this is a film that's based on a life, but maybe they're saying, a bit more faith throughout would have helped him a little bit more. I don't know. I was just a thought. I don't know, because he says I'm not.
Or was it almost like, an exception? Well, that was almost like an exception at the end. That what I could be in a bit of trouble here, and he's like, well, this is where I turn when I'm in trouble.
Yeah. All right. Any other of the others characters that you wanted to talk about?
I did want to talk about his sister. Her name was Ilaria, I believe. She's clearly, and you find this out a little bit afterwards, even in that final scene where they show her, she's kind of running the campaign for the justice of what happened to him. But she's definitely that glue that holds this family together before the event, and obviously after he's passed away as well. She has this great ability to be firm, but she's absolutely humanized by her understanding of people's emotions in basically all situations. And I think I just responded really well to her, because she reacted in ways that I think I would in those situations. Like, I like the fact that she didn't really take shit from anyone, but she was also really aware of how people would feel and put yourself in their shoes where possible. And she sort of showed that in that scene with her husband. She's been such a hard ass to Steph the whole time, being like, well, when he gets out. And he's like, don't be a dick to her. And she's like, you know what? I absolutely wouldn't be. I'm feeling terrible for him that he thinks that no one's seeing him. So I just like this well-roundedness to her character.
Yeah, I reckon we could have had more of her almost, just to balance it out a little bit. And with, I think the mum was called Rita and the dad was Giovanni. I feel like that a lot of the scenes with them, they could have included her more, because obviously we got that impression that the mum had bought in the house. So she's sort of like the not necessarily a soft one, and dad's the firm one, I guess, like good cop got bad cop sort of parenting. But at the same time, the dad was a bit gullible, and I did like that. His first impression is that someone or inmates had beaten him up, and just this naivety, I guess, that we trust the police. The police are a trusted presence, and yeah, I respected the father in that role because he did want to say, hey, I'm no longer this person that gets up at 3 a.m. in the morning to try and find my son. And you've got the sister, like you mentioned, in that same sort of role. She's sick of being made look like a fool by her brother, but we know that they all care about him still. That family dynamic was nice.
Yeah, I think I misjudged the dad a little bit because his uselessness to me at the trial, he he appeared initially like, as you said, the good cop, bad cop. He seemed like this hard guy who was kind of all over it, gonna sort things out when I have to. But despite the fact that he was obviously sick and tired of, as you said, doing all this stuff for his son, I was kind of blown away that he never mentioned something at that trial about the family lawyer or the fact that he was clearly beaten to a pulp. He was just a lot more of a doormat than I thought he was initially set up to be. And to be honest, they were true to that until the end afterwards. Maybe I just misinterpreted him from the start. And the mum was not dissimilar, to be honest. And don't get me wrong, my heart broke for these parents, but they were so ill-equipped to deal with any of this. And they were probably the biggest victims in the story, apart from the obviousness of Stefano.
Yep. I think that's probably it for characters. The director, Alessio Cremonini. Not much to go on. Second feature, I think. Done a bit of TV work, a bit of writing. That was about all I could find.
Would have been a big project for him there.
Yeah, definitely a lot of pressure probably to make sure it was done to a way that was respecting to the family as well. All right, well, let's talk about some scenes. What are some ones that stood out for you?
Yeah, you alluded to this before when you were talking about the constant mentions of the lawyer and his epileptic medication. The first scene that I actually liked was when that doctor gave him his epileptic medication. Like, I think it was the first time I breathed in the entire film. And that was probably like 30 or 40 minutes in. And he's like, because I was like, this epileptic medication's something's going to happen. And he's like, oh, here's your medication. I was like, oh, thank God. Like, it was such a nice moment of a movie that had very little like
something was going right for him for a change.
And I mentioned this scene before. Probably my favorite scene of the film was the sympathy that he got from his sister about how he must feel that no one is coming to visit, because they do paint her as a bit of a hard ass. But I like seeing this side of her character, and it really opened her up and it allowed her to play the role she played for the rest of the film too. So probably my favorite scene of the film, with her and her husband talking about it. And to be honest, like I got emotional seeing the family after they found out what had happened to him. Obviously, the first scene with the mum, they kind of dragged it out a little bit just so you can really feel it. And then consequently, you see the sister walking down the street in tears, and then you see the dad, from the angle of being inside the car. Like that was really emotional and really well done. Despite the fact that I was probably bloody on my knees by this point watching the film, I had nothing left.
Yeah. I agree. I had that scene in the car, like with the camera just staying in there and the cut of the sound. I thought that was pretty impactful. And the same, that follow on where they're in the morgue and the sister sits there and you can hear the parents in the other room, and then you slowly see her go in and join them as well. That was heartbreaking, wasn't it? I'll go through some more.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. I didn't like at the start when he gets taken. I think it was like 2:15. One of those times that he goes to one of those stations, and it feels like he walked through hundreds of corridors to get thrown into that room, and then just that cut, and then the next scene is literally him sitting in the backseat of the car with that purple face. I just thought it was really impactful the way it was done. That they didn't need to show the complete and absolute beating of him, and a lot of the camera work throughout and feeling the pain that he was feeling was really well done. Like the scene where he gets the catheter put in, like that, oh my god, I was like literally in pain. I was feeling that pain. It was just so well done that just horrible. And the same with like the X-ray scene, just being transported on the stretcher, and you just felt like the pain that he was feeling. And I obviously not saying that I can feel that pain, but like as an audience member, geez, I tell you what, horrible.
Yeah, every time he had to move, like it
Yeah.
was excruciating.
Yeah. The last thing I did enjoy at the end the statistics and the information they give you on the end about the actual real life story, just about, he was the 148th person to die in prison in that year, and there was 172 altogether. So, and I think it's sort of, considering how down and out this film was, it was nice to hear that those cops got done for what they'd done. I think that sort of gave me a tiny little bit of redemption at the end, compared to the pain from the rest of the film. So that was a good little touch at the end.
I think it took like 10 years for them to actually be prosecuted. I think there was an initial hearing, they got off, and then it got reopened, and 3 of them got done for manslaughter, or two or three of them got done for manslaughter.
Yep. Yeah. Very true. All right. Are there any things that you didn't like in this one?
There are. So a lot of this has to do with how I felt throughout the film, but by the time that they left his parents' house, after he obviously had been arrested, went to his parents' house, they did the search there, I started to get this really uncomfortable feeling that it wasn't going to let up. I think it was when they sort of said, oh yeah, we'll organise the lawyer. I was like, oh, that's a red flag. Like, I don't know when this film's actually going to show me any sort of positivity. And I was right, but that was a scene that I'm like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And that was pretty early on. So I actually also didn't really like the whole lawyer thing. I thought it was overdone a little bit, because it was frustrating. Like, they really focused on hinting, well, not even hinting really, that the lawyer hadn't been contacted, because they're obviously foreboding that more bad stuff is coming. But the recurring mentions of the epilepsy tablet, him refusing to talk about getting beaten up, and the lawyer, it was just a bit exhausting for me. It was overdone, and it made me think that the director thought I was an idiot. Either that, I guess the idea of that repetition makes it stronger and stronger for him to be like, no, this is what I want you to feel. It's uncomfortable. But for me, it was like, I get it, mate. Don't have to keep telling me this is an issue. I get it. It was just a bit overdone. One thing that I just didn't like with this film, and again, you probably can't do it with this film, so it's not so much the film's fault as much as it's my fault, but there's not one glimmer of hope. Like, the fact that they open the scene with what they did, and then they go back 7 days earlier, you kind of know that you're going to be dealing with this shit for 7 days. Like, that at the end, he's flatlining on the bed. So from now until then, he's going to flatline. And they take away any glimmer of hope, which I found really difficult. And I think they make this film for people who know the story. So that opening scene works. If you don't know the story, I don't think that opening scene does work, because it takes everything away from you. But you're watching the movie very differently. So, and looking at the numbers of people that have seen the film, obviously people that knew the story were the ones that have watched it. So it works out there. But personally, that didn't work for me either. And then finally, carrying on with this kind of vibe that I'm giving off, when the parents were trying to see him, and they obviously couldn't. Again, it was just more stuff to feel down about. Like, they just don't throw you any bone. And I was like, come on, like, cut. I was sort of thinking cut him some slack, but I was also like, cut me some slack. I can't keep doing this. You're killing me here. So as a viewing experience, I did find this difficult, and that was sort of some of the main reasons why.
I think that I agree with everything you've said. And realistically, the only thing that I had down that really annoyed me was, you've put it so much better than I would have put it anyway, was that opening scene that, like you see him down and out so early, like right at the start. So you know exactly what you're going to have to put up with for the next hour and a half. So I just, I think if you cut that, and then, like you mentioned, if you don't know the story as an audience member, you're probably going to be a lot more engaged and a lot more shocked at the end if you don't know what's going to happen at the start. So I agree with that.
I agree with that. Yeah.
All right. What are some themes and some ideas that this one's talking about?
I mean, there's a lot. This is obviously when you're talking about a true story, you're trying to do it justice there. But I mean, why do you make this movie in the first place, right? Like, it's not
Mm,
obviously it's not to really entertain audiences or to for them to sit back and enjoy it. You are literally trying to shine a light on this police brutality, which is terribly relevant right now. Obviously, in 2020, some of the stuff that's been happening in America specifically. Um, this is exactly what we're talking about here. So it highlights it and it pulls absolutely no punches. And it connects this torturous tragedy with it. So for nothing else, this movie is doing a huge job in that education piece and calling it out. So that combined with like the basic human rights and how that can feel when it's taken away from you. Everything that I just described about how I felt watching this film is just a tiny flicker of what it would feel like to have all this happen to you and losing those basic human rights. And there's barely a moment when Stefano is not systematically conspired against from the moments the cop question him. And that feeling is so uncomfortable for an audience member, which is, I'm sure, exactly what they were trying to make in the movie and what exactly they were trying to make people feel and think. So they've succeeded with that for sure.
yeah, 100%. Just this whole idea of policing, like you mentioned, and a little bit through that policing, I guess, is looking at justice. That how do we actually see people with drugs like as criminals? Like, how do we treat them
Yeah.
as drug users? Like, is this the way that we should be treating drug problems, like as crimes like this? And how much power do these police have over people that haven't even been convicted of a crime yet? It's all allegations so far. And you know um, do prisoners get enough medical treatment? Like, is there an issue that
Mm, that's
prisoners
the
that
other
I
one.
heard don't get enough medical treatment? And how like you mentioned this before, that it frustrated you, how do family members get treated by the system too? Like, are they, this is something that happens quite a lot. And the main thing I just finish on is like this idea of responsibility too. There's no one here that wants to take responsibility for what
Mm,
happened. And you see that from when the cops dish them off to different stations and say, I never arrested him, whatever happens wasn't my fault, blah blah
yeah.
blah. Right through, there's just this lack of, yeah. And even right through to the guy at the morgue at the end, he's like, oh, you can't see him.
Yeah.
Like,
That's
just make that call. Just make, someone needs to step up and
yeah.
do something right for a change. So thank goodness that they actually were able to see him at the end.
Yeah. Look, I like the last 2 points you make around responsibility and the medical treatment within the prison system, because I think it's so easy to get overdrawn in the idea of this police brutality that you forget that those are actually two separate issues. The
Mm,
172 people who died in prison in Italy that year, I'm sure a majority of them weren't beaten up by policemen. I'm sure they had
yeah.
pre-existing medical conditions that weren't treated properly and were probably incredibly preventable. And that's just a completely new side of the story that it highlights, but I suppose it just becomes in the background a little bit because it becomes a bit smaller issue because of the bigger issue. But again, very important point.
Good. All right. Well, what did you take away from this one?
Like apart from all those education things we just spoke about, because I think that there is a level of education to this story that is universal and a nice message to take out of it. I think the movie is basically for people who are engrossed by the historical event that it covers. I couldn't recommend this to anyone who isn't across that. I can't shake that feeling of sinking deeper down into a pit of despair whilst watching it, because that was the experience that I had. And if someone doesn't know anything about this, I'm not going to say, "Hey, go check this on. You'll learn a lot," because it was just too much for me. So, but I think there's a lot of good there. I just don't know. I don't know who to tell to watch it. Like it's a hard one. If someone's like, "Hey, I heard this story about Stefano Cucci back in 2009, or whatever," it's like, "Oh, watch this movie. You'll love it."
Movie. Yeah.
That's where it is.
Yeah. I tried to, because like we've both mentioned, like this was such a hard watch, and it's you
Mm.
can't really recommend it to anyone. But just the observation, I guess, was that the international films that we've been watching at the moment, getting a pretty good name for themselves compared to some of the English ones that we've been watching. I've thoroughly enjoyed a lot more
It's
of
a good point.
the international films that we've seen on Netflix. So yeah, sort of open. If I do see an international film that pops up, then might give it a crack, rather than giving it a miss, because
It's a really
yeah,
good point.
these have been pretty well made compared to some of the American ones that we've been watching recently. All
Yeah, it's
right.
interesting whether Netflix is just kind of half-assing the American stuff that they're making, going, oh yeah, I know that actor, let's just make this film, versus, okay, what are the best international films that we can get on this? And if you're an international filmmaker, then the appeal of being on a global platform like Netflix it would be as high as you could get. But the fact you lose a lot out of theatrical release, but it would be great to have your movie seen by the whole world.
And we'll get to Roma eventually, and that maybe that's it's that build up of what we're seeing at this stage in the catalog almost.
Another
All
really
right,
good
did
point.
you jump on IMDb to check anyone out?
Not for this one, no.
Nah, me either. So question time. I asked a few of mine already. So what are some ones that you've got for us?
Yeah, we kind of danced around this one without actually answering it. But why did Stefano eventually tell that guy that the cops beat him up? And how does he choose who he tells? Because I feel like they kept flip-flopping on it, and I wasn't too sure about what that system. Because I get the idea of I don't want to make myself an enemy of the police, but sometimes he told people and then after he told someone, like, oh, he's going to tell everyone now, but then he still chose not to. I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, there was one nurse or doctor that he told, and then I couldn't work it out either. Maybe it was to do with his state of mind. I know there was like one little shortcut where it seemed like it was a few days, but that passed, but obviously it wasn't. But maybe for him, it felt like it was multiple days based on his maybe hallucinations or physical health, and he just didn't know what was happening. I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I got another one.
Good.
Do you think there was actually another guy that he spoke to at nighttime in his last couple of days? I think for me, the idea of him being like, when the guy said, you were getting the x-rays when I arrived, was the sticking point for me to assume that this guy was all in his head, and that was Stefano's justification for how that guy got there without him knowing. But do you think there was anyone there?
That's a really good point. I hadn't considered it, but now that you say it, yeah, more than likely probably would make sense based on that.
Yeah, well, they show him.
Question,
they show him or making up people in that earlier jail cell that weren't actually there, and then obviously he sort of has this conversation, but then the guy's gone that last night, and maybe there's this lucidity to him being close to death that he's not hallucinating. So I just kind of assumed that he created that guy.
I like that. That's good.
Which is sad.
Like the Australian justice system, do you reckon there's things like this that happen?
I'll be honest. I'm way too ignorant on this kind of stuff to know. Like, if it happens, then I don't know about it. If it doesn't happen, then I'm happy. But I couldn't comment on it.
Yeah, maybe that's I just think it's something to ponder and be like, if we see this happening across America at the moment, we know it happens in Italy. Like I'm sure it happens. Probably happens in our state that we don't even know about it. It's just a scary thought.
Yeah, it's true. It is. You're right, actually.
Yeah. The last one I've got is, and I'm not saying in any way that I think that he, like Stefano, deserved to die or anything like that. But as a person, do you think he was a bad person?
No, I don't. I really don't. I do think that he was turning things around a little bit. I know. I just look at that conversation that he had with his mate in his car, right? And that's the real him. And he was talking about like trying to, court this girl or something like that. Like, it was just a very normal conversation that a young guy would have with his mate. That was not a bad conversation. It wasn't talking about what the next bad thing we're going to do is. Like, he was just a normal guy. And I mean, he's made a ton of mistakes. He made a mistake here. Made a lot of mistakes here. Got arrested because he deserved to get arrested. Like, that's all fine. But I don't think he was exclusively a bad person by any means.
No, I think like they mentioned, he'd been to rehab. He'd spoken to his dad and said, "Look, I'm sick of being in your shadow." So it was like he was trying to forge his own sort of pathway. I just pondered that because I was like, probably needed, based on his end, I needed some sort of positivity about him, like some more, memories of him as some flashbacks of him as a kid, or just something showing that he had some sort of redeeming qualities in him. I think it was probably just that this was such a heavy down movie.
It's a good point, but would that have made it harder?
Yeah, probably. It would have made it more emotional, would it?
Yeah.
Oh God. All right. Well, I think we're ready to sort of tie this one up, and at the end we give our film a rating out of 5 to give it a Flix from average. So what are you saying for this one, MJ?
Like, this was a really, really tough watch. I mean, for me, without the prior knowledge of the events, I can't really imagine something. Well, I can't imagine someone sitting through it and having a positive experience. And that's not me saying I need a story to be uplifting for me to enjoy it. Not at all. I think a grim, depressing movie can still contain so much absolute human truths that mean something to me, that resonate with me. And this didn't have that, nor did it have that conventional storytelling traits to give the viewer hope or excitement or build any sort of mystery. I think either or one of those things is it's a fundamental convention in some capacity, and not having that historical context to aid me, I was just completely left out on sea with this one. So it's 2 stars.
True. No worries. All right. Well, um, yeah, like I mentioned, this one was really hard to watch. It was slow, but it didn't really drag for me. I just couldn't believe that I was sitting there watching him go through all this, knowing that I was going to see him at the end on that table at the end, 7 days later, knowing that I was going to have to watch this and knowing where he was going to end up. And I didn't get that chance to see him redeem himself. So that sort of frustrated me a bit, and it was heartbreaking. But I think even like just right at this current stage, I think it's a really important thing to see and for people to watch. I'm giving it a 3.5. So but I completely see where you're coming from, because I feel exactly the same things that you mentioned, but I still did enjoy this. So that would give us I can't even work out maths properly. That's about 2.75 as a Flix Forum average.
Yeah, it's quite a difference, actually.
Yeah.
I completely see where you're coming from as well, though. That's the thing. I get that too.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, we're on social media. We've got Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Don't put a question out this week. I'm going to put a website in the show notes. It's called Mapping Police Violence. It's a website. You can click on it and you can check out all around where evidence of police violence has occurred, and sort of some statistics and evidence to sort of check out and just see some situations to inform yourself a bit about, I guess, this topic we've looked at.
Wonderful. I like that.
Good. All right. So we're back again next week. Hopefully it's a bit more of an upbeat show next week. It's it's from 2018. It's an Israeli-American spy thriller. It's called The Angel. It's directed by Ariel Roman, and it stars Marwan Kenzari and Toby Kebbell. So that's what we've got next week. Okay. Israeli-American spy thriller.
Of course.
I wonder if it's in English.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, so you don't know.
No, don't know. So we'll find out, I'm sure, in the coming days.
We'll find out.
As always, it's been a pleasure. So thank you for taking the time. And this one was a little bit of a downer one, but I think, it was worth chatting about.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the benefits, is that we do get to chat through it. I think I would have felt morbid if I didn't get to talk about this with someone. So that worked out well.
Yeah, because I don't think I know anyone that's watched it. So glad we'd give it a crack.
Absolutely.
All right, I will see you next week.
See you then.